kid from the bush who grew into a legend in his own lunchtime, former SAS soldier Michael J. Malone has seen it all. This is Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, hosted by the man himself, Mick Malone, along with Toby Malone, as they examine this long, storied career in the Australian Special Forces. Join us each week for behind-the-scenes insight, exclusive readings, and brutally honest truths from a true original. Welcome to Never Die Wondering. Welcome to episode 4 of Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, a podcast that explores the life and legend of Michael John Malone, OAM. My name is Toby Malone, Mick's son and co-host of this podcast series, joined by the man whose name is in the title, Mick Malone. G'day, Dad.
G'day, mate. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Been better.
Oh, well, I think that's always the case sometimes, isn't it?
Sinus with my lungs, not good.
Well, I mean, that's what happens after a lifetime of hard living.
It does.
How are you feeling about the podcast so far?
A bit of fun, mate. Bit of fun.
Yeah, we've recorded a few episodes.
I'm looking forward to it.
Good.
Looking forward to plowing through the book.
Yeah, although you seem to have a bit of a reluctance to talk about yourself.
Yeah, a bit of that. Once you write it all down, it's a bit hard to then go back and talk about yourself. It's just the way.
You just prefer it when other blokes talk about you. You're like...
Yeah, a bit of that.
So last week we spent a little bit of time doing a little bit of the acknowledgements and front matter for the book, but this week we're going to get into the book itself, talking about your early life before you joined the army, and so this chapter is called Aimless, which was sort of connected to the fact that when you left high school, you were feeling a bit aimless in the world. You weren't really sure what you were going to do with yourself, and you were just knocking around the western suburbs of Sydney with no real plan.
Well, I had no idea.
So you were
gormless youth,
yeah. And so at high school, it's something that we don't really talk about in this book. It's more covered in Hail Mary the Creek's Up, but you sort of had a plan that you thought at high school that you enjoyed wool classing, and you thought maybe you'd have a career in agriculture, and you were looking down that path.
Yeah.
But it never really worked out in that way.
No, that soon came to a screeching halt once I got a job in the wool stores.
Right. And you found that the union nonsense at the wool stores really...
Unions and a cranky father, all that.
Yeah. And so...
I'll get out and do my own thing somehow.
Yeah. And the army was always lurking in the background because your uncles were both in the army. Your dad was in the army, or at least served in the war. And your uncle Terry was a career soldier.
Now he was an RSM of the 100 River Lancers.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to Vietnam with the training team. He wasn't a bad sort of a bloke, but he was a bit of a buffhead the way he used to treat Pete, his eldest son.
So Pete was your cousin, Peter Malone?
He was killed in action in Vietnam.
Yeah, and we'll get into talking about Pete in future chapters.
Yeah.
And you and Pete were almost exactly the same age.
Yeah.
So
I think he was 5 months older than me.
Right. And so what was the temperature like in the 60s in Australia, watching blokes go off to Vietnam and seeing it sort of started to heat up? We talk about the Battle of Long Tan in this chapter, but
you had all the leftists carrying on about Bob Menzies' war, and that was it. There were a lot of communists around those days, and that was it. I avoided politics very as wide a berth as I could probably give, but I couldn't get away from my father and his leftist politics.
But you You didn't have any misgivings about going to war and didn't scare you?
No, 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 no. To me, it was just an adventure. Um, once I once I got to SAS, I realised it was a different kettle of fish
Hmm.
than what normal soldiering would be. But at the end of the day, it was the best thing I ever did. Um, 35 years, I never regretted a single moment of it.
Where do you reckon you'd be now if you hadn't enlisted?
Ah, sliding doors, mate. It could have been anywhere. Could have been a no hope, a bum up in the bush somewhere, living on the banks of the Castle Ray.
I probably wouldn't exist if you hadn't enlisted.
No,
So
you wouldn't. You wouldn't.
you never would have come to WA. You never would have met my mum. Yeah. 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 It's crazy. Yeah. Although you talked later about how you probably would have been conscripted even if you hadn't have enlisted.
Well, my number came out of the barrel,
Yeah.
but I was already in the army at that stage, so it didn't apply.
Right.
But I would have been called for sure.
Great. Well, we're going to read a little bit of the book today. What we're going to try to do is each episode we're going to try to cover a chapter, one of the chapters from Two Ranks on the Road. So today we'll be reading chapter one of Two Ranks on the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Services by Michael J. Malone, OAM, published in 2024 by Imprimatur Books, Perth. This chapter, entitled Aimless, covers pages 1 to 8 in the print edition. The e-book may have slightly different numbering, so if you're reading along on that, follow from the beginning of the chapter. As we read, the body of the text will be read by author Mick Malone. Whenever we come across a footnote, we'll pause in the least disruptive way possible, and I will read the footnotes. So if you hear my voice, that's a footnote, and otherwise it's the body of the text. Also, each chapter does feature pictures. We're going to skip over those in the reading and then we'll discuss them at the end of the reading. So we'll just talk about the pictures that come up. And now, without further ado, Two Ranks on the Road.
Chapter 1, Aimless, 1947 to 1966. As if a sign from God, in parenthesis. I was born in Binnaway, in country New South Wales, in April 1947, and lived a typical knockabout country kid's life, playing rugby, looking after the cows, getting into strife. When I was 11, my parents, Ned and Joyce Malone, packed me off to boarding school at St Stanislaus College in Bathurst, where I learned some tough lessons that would serve me throughout my life. After I left Stannies and St Bernard's, I floated around from job to job, and by 1965, I was 18 years old and aimless. I had left a job in the wool store at Millers Point and moved to an aluminium production plant in Granville, unbelievably, which was excruciatingly boring, but at least the pay wasn't bad. I was there for around 12 months, enough time for me to vow never to find this sort of work again. My mate Mick Ryan suggested I join him working at the vinyl tile manufacturer CSR in Concord. But that turned into yet another shit job. I didn't last long in this job either. I hated shift work. I turned 19 in April 1966 and was having real doubts about what I should be doing in my shitty life. I was knocking around with some losers at home and wasn't getting on at all with my father, who seemed very withdrawal and cranky most of the time. After a particularly savage confrontation between us, I punched him hard in the nose and jumped the back fence and bolted. Did I do this? I stayed with my mate for a couple of days, and when I came back expecting slings and arrows, nothing was ever said. I think I realised I'd overstepped. Uh, I realised he'd overstepped the mark, and it was his fault. He had a broken nose and two black eyes, and I was personally very sorry for striking him. Surely I thought now I was on the way to hell. I had other things to keep me distracted, though. An old Morris 8 convertible by this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had an old Morrisate convertible by this time and used to head down the coast with another bloke, Big Mick, with two surfboards sticking out the top. Later, I got hired.
Footnote. It cost me
Yep.
25 quid and nearly ended my life. One day in a downpour, I stopped at a T-junction, looked both ways, and pulled out just to be collected by a bloody big truck. Luckily, he'd slowed right down, and I was close to a standstill, but the car was wrecked. Luckily, I was all right. Another salutary lesson. They seem to be coming thick and fast these days.
I got uh, later. I got hire purchase to buy a new car, and I chose the new Japanese-made little Isuzu Valette.
Footnote. Dad wasn't too happy with my choice because he was still in that post-war funk of not having anything Japanese in the house.
Bloody old hypocrite. It was lovely owning a brand new car in the 60s. The girl up the road, who I was madly but secretly in love with, was even more impressed. My lout mates couldn't believe their eyes when they all piled in for a spin. Washed that car with an inch of its life and kept it humming. But still, I had no real direction. And then, as if a sign from God, the Battle of Long Tan happened in South Vietnam on the 18th of August 1966. This was a huge battle fought by D Company 6 RAR in a rubber plantation against the enemy 275 Regiment, which was planning to attack the Australian base at Nui Dat, still in the process of being established. We lost 18 killed in action in the battle, while the enemy lost probably 300 plus, with many more wounded. It was the Australian Army's biggest battle of the entire war. Um, Reading of the amazing heroism of those young blokes.
Footnote.
Footnote.
I knew one, Paul Large from Coolah, who was killed at Long Tan 10 weeks after his 21st birthday.
Yeah, poor old Paul. It prompted me to reconsider my purposeless life up to now, and decided to do something about it. At this time, one of my mates scored a good job with a snowy mountain scheme, and will be leaving next week. After work on a Friday, we pulled into the pub at Miller's Point for a celebratory drink. Dave was a good bloke, and we would miss him. On the Monday morning, we noticed Dave's absence, and one of the blokes who lived on the Fairfield line, close to Dave, made a gutting announcement. Dave had shot himself on the Friday night, literally hours after we sent him off at the pub. In the tea room, we tried to analyse whether it was anything we did or said which may have caused such a catastrophe. We attended the funeral and were confronted by a distraught mother to this day, we have no idea what drove him to this act. A day or two later, in part because of this tragedy, two mates and I downed tools and headed for the Army recruiting office. Once in there, I had second thoughts, which were soon dispelled once I was in the recruiter's office. We filled out all the necessary admin details, and that was it. I had an appointment to come back in a month with my parents' signatures on an attestation form. My mates from work were gone when I came out, and I saw them later the next day at work. How'd you go? I asked. Nah, not for me. The other one said the same. I replied, well, I've got an appointment in a month to jump through their selection hoops. On the way home on the train, I had plenty of time to mull this over. Was this the right thing for me? I read in the papers each day soldiers being killed in Vietnam. Why would I want to put myself in that scenario? I made up my mind by the time I got home. Photo of mum and dad there.
Yeah, we'll talk about that at the end.
Dad was in the lounge, mum in the kitchen. I spoke to Dad, and all I got was a grunt. Dad, I want you to sign these papers, please. What are they? He said. I want to join the army. These are the papers because I'm underage. No, I'm not signing them. Wait till you're 21. I arced up at that and said, if you don't sign them, I'll forge your signature. You'll never see me again. Luckily, Mum stepped in and said, Signed the bloody papers. I still remember that. He signed and gave the papers to me. I hope you know what you're doing. I hope so too. Wow, I'd done it. First hurdle negotiated. All I had to do now was to keep out of trouble around the shithole of the town, pass the army psych, another test to prove I wasn't a total prong, and that I'd be of use to the army. The 4 weeks seemed to fly by at work. My mind certainly wasn't on this shit job. It was one of the prospects of army service. It was on the prospects of army service. Dad always spoke in glowing terms of his mateships and camaraderie of soldiering. He never talked about the bad bits. He was wounded by shrapnel in Alamein and shot through the shoulder in New Guinea, but never spoke of these incidents. It was all funny stories that he spoke about. One of his brothers, Terry Malone, was an RSM in the armoured corps, and wasn't regarded very highly by the old infantrymen. When it came time to attend the recruiting office in Pitt Street, Sydney, I was as nervous as all get out. I got there early and sat on the park bench for 20 minutes to wash some time off. At the designated time, I went into the recruiting office waiting room and met two men who would become my firm mates right through rookie and infantry training. One was a little hard Greek cove named Jack Doulis, who appeared to be a lot older.
A footnote, he was in
than me.
fact 8 years older.
Yeah, and had a big dent in his forehead from the Claremont Speedway fence, where he was riding Speedway as a young man.
Footnote, he rode against the legendary Chum Taylor, but I'm not sure he ever beat him.
Jack said he wanted to join the army to feed his family of six. The other was Rod Wallace, who would go on to serve with me in SASR after infantry training. We were all pretty nervous, not knowing what was going to happen. When it was my turn, I was directed into a room with a sergeant behind the desk. Sit down and pay attention, he said. There were a series of charts on the desk, which I soon found out were Rorschach tests, a series of random ink blobs where the psych person could determine your personality or some other such bollocks. Then it was a hearing test, an eyesight test, various questionnaires to do with family proclivities and if I drank or smoked. Then it was into another room with a doctor who cut my bollocks and said, cough. He also listened to my heart, stuck his finger up my nether region and looked at my feet and knees. Sorry. I told a serious lie amongst all this when I said I'd never had asthma. If I'd said yes, then that would have been the end of my military career before it even started. I thought I was on a pretty safe ground when I'd always thought I'd grown out of it years ago. Then it was back into the waiting room to await the verdict. A couple of hours later, I was told I'd done well and to report to the attestation room where I swore in the Bible to do my government's bidding. At the end of it all, I was told to report to Eastern Command Personnel Depot, ECPD, at Watson's Bay in 2 weeks. And then I would be prepared for the trip south to recruit training battalion at Kapurka, 1RTB, outside Wagga in country New South Wales. Home again on the train to endure the scowls and opprobrium of my father. He was actually quite pleased that I'd made it through. Being a staunch Labor man, he wasn't too keen on the prospect of me going to Vietnam for what Labor called Bob Menzies' war. The war was raging by this time. Terry was preparing to go with the AATTB, and my cousin Peter, who had joined at 17, was slated to go with his unit, 3 Cav Regiment, were listed to deploy. Mum was on edge, but pleased that I was going to do something with myself, having let her down with my education. Uncle Terry rang and invited me to the sergeant's mess at Lancer Barracks in Parramatta the next night. I was quite looking forward to being and having a drink with him. You never know, I might learn something as if I began my soldering career. When I got there, Terry, who was the RSM, took me into the Sergeant's Mess bar where I met all these CMF, citizen military forces, staff, non-commissioned officers, senior NCOs and Y2s, many of whom had chests full of medals from World War II, Korea, Malaya, Borneo, and Vietnam. Most of them were chocos.
Footnote, Army reservists, long ago nicknamed Chocos from chocolate soldiers.
Chocos, where's that? Oh, most of them were chocos and out to pasture, as it were. A few schooners later, and it wasn't long before I had the wobbly boots on and needed to go home. I thanked Terry profusely and took my leave. I got on the train to St Mary's with a view that I would sober up by the time I got home. Dad was in bed, but Mum was still up watching TV. I didn't say much, but I think she was relieved that I was home in one piece. The next few days went like a blur. I had to get around to say goodbye to various mates and girlfriends, especially my little unsullied redhead in Penrith. Although I was sad to leave my mates, I wasn't sad to be off because this was my escape time. This was escape time. I loved my father strongly, but there wasn't space enough for both of us in the same house. I must admit I shed a tear saying goodbye to Mum and my sister Helen, but that was it. Away I went. Dad dropped me down at the station for my part, and I never looked back. I was 19. It was 19 September 1966, and I had commenced my long army career, inspired by my father and his family service in World War II, as well as heroism at Long Tan. I was determined to go the distance no matter what. The train to Sydney was uneventful. I got off at Central Station, where I was to meet others on the draft. We were met by a very stern-sounding sergeant who directed us to a truck and a bus. We were driven across to Watson's Bay ECPD and dropped at a World War II-era barracks. Once unloaded, we were lined up and directions and orders were shouted at us. Mess hall over there, sleeping in that building, barber there. The food was plentiful in the mess hall, and then we were all lined up to get shorn. And I mean shorn. Some blokes really had long hair and I wasn't too pleased to lose it all. Our draft consisted of around 100 young blokes, and we were introduced to our draft control officer, DSDCO, a small in height man, a bit younger than my father. His name was Sergeant M.J. Gillespie, and I soon found out about him. Malone, eh? Ned Malone, your old man? Yes, Sergeant, he is. Surely this couldn't be the Wallet Gillespie of El Alamein fame in 2nd, 13th Battalion that my old man always spoke of. It appeared Wallet was Arabic for boy, and he was very young at Alamein. And here he was, still serving over 20 years after the war. I must admit I received fairly preferential treatment from then on. We were in Watson's Bay for 2 days, attending to all manner of admin, from pay books, service records, AB83s, medical records, photographs, dog tags, and so on. There was a lot to do. After an exhausted sleep, we were up at Sparrows for whatever came next, starting with slathers of bacon and eggs in the mess, along with whatever we could put away. By day 2, we were well into the process of meeting each other, and I gravitated naturally to my 2 besties I'd met on day 1, Jack Doulis and Rod Wallace. Being older than the rest of us, Jack had seen a lot in life. We were 19-year-olds ready to learn at his knee. Although we managed to filter out the really rough stuff, Jack had a couple of card games going already, and he had relieved a few of the dupes of their shekels. Before we knew it, we'd packed up our gear and stacked our ports outside the barracks, getting ready to embus for the railway station. Once at Central, we were again lined up and the roll was called. I hadn't heard a roll call since cadets at St Bernard's in 1963. Then it was down to platform 8 where the train was waiting. And all our ports were already loaded into the goods van. Each of us had a small dilly bag with us with a bottle of water, cigarettes, toothbrush, and the like. Jack, Rod, and I stuck together and occupied a compartment towards the end of the train. It was September and still pretty cold, but the compartment had a heated steel bar on the floor, which were the bee's knees on New South Wales railways. I'd travelled on New South Wales rail for a few years, but I had never been south to Wagga Wagga. It was a very scenic trip, and I must say it was nearly ruined when Jack produced a bottle of whisky out of his bag, which he proceeded to pass around amongst the six of us in the compartment. I nearly got sprung by Wog when he stuck his head in the door and called me out into the corridor for a yarn. We talked about my old man and him in the desert and later in New Guinea. He had a lot of good things to say about Ned, which was quite gratifying, since ANZAC Day was only the other time that I had heard good things about him in the army. He was highly regarded by his mates, which was good to hear and reflected my thoughts about myself. Family and mates were the most important things to me and continue to be so to this day. End of chapter 1.
So that was chapter one from Two Ranks on the Road, 35 years of Special Forces service, 35 years of Australian Special Forces service by Michael J. Malone, as read by the author. Okay, so lots of memories there going back to your pre-army days.
Yep,
And yeah, it was sounds like it was a tumultuous time for you before you got in there.
it
Uh,
certainly was the old escape.
yeah, blueing with your dad. It sounds like you two had a fairly contentious relationship when you were a teenager.
Oh, yeah, bloody torture. He came from old school stuff,
Yeah,
and it was just this punk in the 60s. Um,
yeah,
no idea what to do, no idea how to get out of it. I knew I had to escape somehow, and the army looked like it was the way to go.
yeah. And that story you tell about punching my grandfather and jumping the fence and running off it, that was a legendary one. There's another one that you used to tell about you blokes driving down the road having throwing punches at each other while you're driving in the car. What was that one?
Yeah, that was a bit out of order. We were both half shot, and I don't know. He said something, and then I said something, bouncing off the side of my head.
So it's probably for the best that you got away and got into the army
Ah,
to
God,
redirect
yeah.
that energy.
I loved him dearly. I think he was a great bloke and was well regarded by everyone that knew him. But oh my word, geez. Anyway, that was Ned Malone.
Yeah, and in Two Ranks, we have a picture on page three of Ned and Joyce Malone, a picture from around 1975. And so you can see there, if you're looking at the book, they're always a very kindly, warm pair of people. And um, your mother comes up a little bit in this book, bits and pieces, but more so in Hail Mary the Creek's Up. So if you once you read that book, you'll get much more of a sense of Joyce Malone, nee Joyce Brown. But she was a lovely lady.
He was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and she lived into her 90s and just about and uh, and we lost your father quite early.
Yeah, he was only 70
Yeah,
when he died.
that was a real shock though, when I was a kid.
Pancreatic cancer.
Mm, yeah, it's a real bugger of a thing. So yeah, so there's yeah, lots coming out of there. I mean that aimlessness of sort of trying to figure out what you're doing, and I remember identifying with that when I was a teenager, just trying to figure out. For me, I had the privilege or the of being able to opt to go to uni, which wasn't really an option for you because you were pulled out of the school you were happy at, and you weren't.
I was bright as the one watt bulb.
Well, you're also too busy playing rugby and handball
Yeah,
and
yeah.
smoking in the uh,
Smoking. God.
smoking. Yeah, yeah, all of that. So while you're an asthmatic and
Oh, mate, you can't educate mugs, you know that.
no, no, no. So yeah, so it gives a sort of a good sense of why you got into the military. A lot of people who were conscripted were in reluctantly. They didn't want to be there. They weren't excited about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's right.
so you at least had the option of making the choice, and
Yes.
so you made it, and and yeah, it's sort of good to get that sense of what it was like to go through the enlistment, and then meeting Walid Gillespie on the train,
Mm.
and having that connection. So you said you got preferential treatment. What does that mean? You weren't asked to run extra laps
I
and
kicking people up the arse over something or other. I was left out of it.
right.
So well, he was just so thrilled to know that his mate Ned Malone's son was joining the army.
Yeah. Was it
Anyway, you
only
want to get stuck
I get
into chapter two?
not yet, no. So so yeah, and so at that time I suppose there was a lot of old World War II blokes who were hanging around, who had served in World War II and were 25 years later were
Yeah, yeah. I
still
always saw them
doing the thing.
with their World War II gongs on. A lot of them with Malaya and Borneo and Korea.
Hmm.
So they stayed in the army, or they got out of the army and got back in when the balloon went up, sort of thing. And then you see the ones with Vietnam medals on top of that.
Yeah.
So there's about 12 in the group.
Yeah. Well, the ones stacked up.
They've been around, those
Yeah.
blokes.
And then speaking of blokes, you talk about two of your great mates in this chapter, Jack Doulis and Rod Wallace, the two
Yeah,
originals.
yeah,
We lost Jack last year, I believe,
yeah. Died recently.
but he was a real personality, real colourful
Oh,
personality.
little little blackjack. He came home from Vietnam in the cells in the brig of the Sydney. So he bounced one off the sergeant's head, apparently.
Well, and he didn't make it through to the SAS, so
No, he
so
wasn't. He wasn't interested in coming across the West. Life
yeah.
was hard enough as it was without.
Well, and he had kids and all sorts of things as
Oh, he
well.
had about 5 kids. Yeah,
Yeah. So, and we'll meet Jack a little bit more in the next chapter. And then Rod Wallace, who you
he's
served
still
with,
going.
he's still
Still
around.
Queensland.
Yeah, it's a really gratifying thing as we were working on this book to be able to send the manuscript to some of these blokes who could read about their own um, uh, time in the military through this lens, and everyone's pretty positive about it and how it all looks.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a good thing. So, all right. So, plenty of fun stuff there in chapter one. So, yeah. Anything else that we didn't cover in that chapter about what we? Well, I think there's plenty of interesting stuff in there, and we'll continue to get the bugs out of this reading process with the footnotes. It's a little bit awkward, but I think we cover it all pretty well. Um, so that is all the time we have this week for Never Die Wondering. Join us next week for the next installment of Mick in our exploration of Mick Malone's career as we get into the second chapter of the book itself entitled Kapuka. If you have a copy of Two Ranks, read along with us. I've been Toby Malone, and thank you to Mick Malone for wholeheartedly joining me on this journey.
My pleasure.
This has been Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words. For links to purchase your own copies of Mick's books, visit the show notes or mickmalone.com.au. This podcast is produced by Toby Malone, Joe Malone and Mick Malone and engineered by Toby Malone. Theme music is The Happy Wanderer, the official SAS march, as reimagined by Cormac Malone and Meg Logue Malone. Yes, this is a family affair. This is a GM production in association with Imprimatur Books.